So that's a part of what this podcast is about. Finding out if what happened to you was really something that the church was doing against you, or a person in the church was doing against you, whether it was on purpose, whether it was intentionally or not. Sometimes that's not so much the case that it matters whether it was intentional or not. What we're looking at is that you got hurt. How did you get hurt? How do we help you start healing from that hurt? And how do we help you avoid being hurt in that type of way ever again? Welcome to the Church Hurt Recovery Podcast with your host, Soneakqua J, where we'll walk through the question, what in the church happened to you? I am a licensed professional counselor in the states of Texas and Ohio, where I work with people dealing with anxiety, depression, and religious trauma, also known as church hurt. But this is not therapy. This is a podcast highlighting social and emotional learning skills and strategies that will help you manage your thoughts, feelings, emotions, decisions, and relationships as it pertains to everyday life, but specifically for the church. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Grab your water and your journal and let's jump in. Welcome back to the Church Hurt Recovery Podcast, where we ask the question, what in the church happened to you? And then we highlight social and emotional learning skills and strategies that will help you manage your thoughts, feelings, emotions, relationships, and decisions in everyday life, but specifically as it pertains to the church. Now, we're back this week on a different episode, but we're picking up off of a previous episode. If you didn't see our first episode talking about giving, go back to the episode dated December the 11th and then December the 18th. So you get your introduction into this and your very first episode on self-awareness as it pertains to giving. Now, what we're in a season of right now is looking at church hurt, or people who have experienced church hurt because of giving. And it's not necessarily that the giving in and of itself was a problem. It was that you felt manipulated into your giving. And so I see this a lot in my practice, as well as with just family members and other people who have been manipulated or felt manipulated in your giving. Now, remember when we talk about church hurt, one of the aspects of this is that it can be a perceived or an actual hurt. So often we are looking at the person's perception of what happened, and this case will be no different. So we're picking up again on the scenario of Cadence. This is a real scenario that happened to a real person. I have just changed the name of the person and some of the details so as not to identify who this really is, but I do have permission to talk about the story. So the story, or the scenario, and it's not a story, it's a real person, but the example is that Cadence was a faithful church member in her church. She was a giver. She was a tither. She enjoyed sowing. She was reaping the harvest of her seed. Everything was going well. She was serving in the church. And then something a little bit different happened as far as the church administration. The church came up with a system, or brought in a system that will help them better with tithes and offering. And it was a financial system that was going to basically connect your bank account, or Cadence's bank account, to the church's bank account. Now, they were offering this system to everybody in the church. It was voluntary. No one was forced to go on the system. It was just a system that would help the church do better with taking and giving the tithes and offerings and everything from the congregation. So Cadence signed up for the program because she thought that it was fine. So she was signing up for the program, and then something went a little bit awry. So this is what happened. She gave permission for the church to take money from her bank account, and she set the amount. But what she neglected to do was set the timing of when the payments would come out. What she wanted was for the amount that she had selected to be taken out every other week, bi-weekly, but she did not indicate that. And so the church set the system up on a weekly deposit from her account into theirs. When she realized that this was happening, she did go back to the church immediately, and they immediately attempted to rectify the situation. What neither one of them knew, neither Cadence nor the church knew, was that anytime you needed to make a change in this system, it could take up to 90 days for it to be corrected. So the problem that happened was they were taking, or the system was set up to take this certain amount out of Cadence's bank account every week until it was corrected. And so Cadence felt like they could have done something more to help her. They could have done something like this faster. She was going to the finance team, the finance department, to try to get this thing rectified. Well, she ended up leaving the church without saying anything to any of the church leadership, the pastor, no one. And so even though after the system was corrected, the banking issue was corrected, the church sent her a check back for all the money it had taken that she didn't want. So every other week, they sent her the check back for the money that was taken out. But Cadence had already left the church feeling like they had done this to her on purpose, and that they had manipulated her into using this system, and so on and so forth. Now, none of what I'm talking about today is to blame Cadence for any of this situation, nor to blame the church. I am looking at it from a neutral party. I am a mental health professional, and what I am helping people in my practice to look at, as well as anybody who is listening to this podcast, is that you have some responsibility here. And so because you do, you have to learn to manage yourself in these instances. So the first thing that I would recommend to anybody who is running across a system like this is, if your bank account cannot handle a mishap for $100 or more, or whatever the amount is that you are wanting to have debited from your account. If you can't handle a mishap happening, if that's going to send your account into the negative, don't sign up for the deposit or the debit, because you're going to, I mean, there can always be an issue. Banking systems have issues. Systems have issues. So if you're going to sign up for someone or some system to automatically debit your account in any area of your life, and definitely in the church, if you can't handle a mishap, if that's going to put your account into the negative, don't do that. Don't sign up. Just manage the money yourself. Just do it on your own, because that was an option for Cadence to do it on her own. She willingly signed up for this system. So yes, she did get hurt in this process, but this is what I'm working with Cadence on, is that this wasn't what she considered church hurt, really wasn't that. So let's talk about, if you have found yourself in this type of situation or anything close to it, let's work on your self management, because in the previous episode that we talked about was on December the 18th. We talked about money and self awareness. So now we have moved down to self management. So after you're aware of how you're feeling emotionally and some of those things that we talked about previously, now you have to use those things to manage yourself. And when it comes to your money, especially if you're tight in your finances, or you feel like people are always out to manipulate you, or the church is always after your money. You have to learn how to self manage, how to self regulate, because there are scriptures in the Bible all throughout talking about money. I'm not going to go into any of that. I'll let you look those things up on your own. But the church needs money. It operates off money just like any other facility or business or anything like that. Where do you think the money comes from? It just doesn't fall from heaven because it's God's church. Okay. So the church runs off of money. So when you give in your tithes, offering your seed, the church uses that for whatever they need to use it for. Once it leaves your hands, you have to think about, okay, now that's their responsibility. So what you have to manage is how and when it leaves your hands. So don't let anybody dip into your account if something's going to send you into the negative. If you don't have ample amounts of money, don't let any system dip into your account, because there could always be a mishap. So again, I'm not saying blaming Cadence for this. I'm just wanting Cadence to understand where she can do things better next time. Because at this point in time, Cadence is no longer in a church. She might visit, but she's very afraid. She does not participate in ministry. She definitely doesn't give. And it's all surrounding this incident that happened that she felt like the church manipulated her and did something egregious against her, when in actuality, it didn't. They responded to her immediately in the best way that they knew how, and they returned all of the money. It may not have been as timely as she would have liked for it to have been, but they attempted to rectify the situation. So this did not have to end in church hurt for Cadence, but it did. So that's a part of what this podcast is about. Finding out if what happened to you was really something that the church was doing against you, or a person in the church was doing against you, whether it was on purpose, whether it was intentionally or not. Sometimes that's not so much the case that it matters whether it was intentional or not. What we're looking at is that you got hurt. How did you get hurt? How do we help you start healing from that hurt? And how do we help you avoid being hurt in that type of way ever again? So in this self-management episode, we have to look at the places that Cadence could have managed better. And the first thing is that you don't have to let somebody debit your account automatically, even if it is the church. That was an option. She voluntarily did that. Then looking at yourself, okay, when a mistake happens, she did go to them and try to rectify, uh, to correct it, and the everything got set into motion that would correct it. It was just a matter of time that it would take to have that happen. So one thing that I recommended to Cadence was, could you have gone back and talked to somebody higher in leadership, the pastor maybe, or another minister, an associate pastor, somebody that may have had more authority than the finance team? Because what could have happened was talking to the pastor or some other part of leadership that may have been able to go to the finance team and authorize them that even though they could not stop the debits from going, that every time a debit happened, or maybe even before it happened, that every other week they would go ahead and give Cadence the money to put back into her account, even though the system was going to debit it, so that it would not affect her account. But she left the church without even talking to anyone, assuming that they were doing this on purpose and not wanting to help her, when that actually wasn't the case. But sometimes when you are in your emotions and you don't know what to do, you're not thinking straight, you don't have all of these things in place, you don't have all of these solutions or suggestions that I'm giving you now. So why we're doing things like this on this podcast is so that you might be prepared. so that if something comes like up like this for you or anyone else you love, possibly in the future, that you might have a better plan or a suggestion or something that would help them avoid what Cadence is calling church hurt, because she did get hurt by a situation that happened involving the church. And most of us go away saying that's church hurt. But when you look at it in actuality, had that happened in any other form of fashion? Because it could have. What if you had connected your Netflix or your Hulu or your Disney Channel to your bank account for them to debit it automatically, and they accidentally debited more than one time and it sent your bank account into the negative? You don't just leave Netflix typically, do you? We leave the church though, because we feel like the church is supposed to be perfect somehow. But when this kind of thing happens in everyday life, we don't leave the company or leave the whatever we're the process or the program or whatever we're involved in when this happens. Yes, we do get upset. We may call and we may try to get it handled, but you don't break up with the company that you really want when you want to see your Netflix or your Hulu or Prime or whatever it is you have. You don't break up with the company because they made an error. You get them to correct it. And once it's corrected, you go on with your life. But for some reason, we don't feel that way when it comes to the church. We do break up with the church. We leave, we go to a different church, we start our own church, whatever the case may be. So what I'm trying to get us to notice and to see as people of God, as believers in Christ, that you can manage yourself well enough to ensure that a lot of the things that we have experienced in the past that we've called church hurt do not happen again, and that we also call these things as they are. This technically was not a church hurt where somebody in the church or some official or the church doctrine or something like that actually caused offense to Cadence. This was a situation that was rectified, maybe not as timely as she would have liked, and I get that. But this was not a church hurt. This was not something that she really needed to leave her faith and leave the church and not participate, not walk in her assignment anymore over. But that's exactly what happened. So a part of what I want you guys to understand when you're listening to this podcast is that when I go through these examples, what I'm walking through is something for you to prepare, something for you to see as it is. And I am going to give some examples that really are church hurt. Like people really did things on purpose that hurt people in the church. I am going to give some examples like that. So I don't want you to think that I'm just trying to show you that nothing is church hurt, because that's not the case. But what I am going to call to your attention is how to manage yourself better, how to walk through the social and emotional learning scale, the skills and strategies that you can use so that you are less likely to be hurt. So you are less likely to hurt other people. Okay. So what I want to do now is to again show you self-management. When you understand your own emotions, that comes out of self-awareness, you understand your thoughts, your feelings, it then shows you how to manage your behavior. So when you look at managing behavior, especially in this instance, I've already given you several things that Cadence could have done and should do in the event that anything like this ever happens in the future. But also be aware enough, manage yourself enough to know that when you are emotional about anything, when you are feeling all the feels, and I'm not against feeling. You need to feel. Your feelings are indicators, but they're not dictators. You don't operate in off of your feelings. And that's what Cadence did. She started feeling like they did these things on purpose, even though they didn't. But you can't see that when you're in your emotions. So you have to allow yourself to pause. Learn how to manage yourself well enough to pause when you are in your emotions so that you can think. Emotions do not think. They do act though, but they don't think. You need to pause long enough to step out of your emotions so that you can get into your intellect, so that you can think and you can manage yourself a whole lot better. So I hope this episode on self-management and money in the church was helpful to you. If it was, remember to subscribe. I will drop some links wherever the video is playing so that you can subscribe on Spotify. You can subscribe on YouTube. I will also drop some links for some courses that you guys can take that are self-managed, self-paced courses where you can learn some different skills that you're not necessarily going to get from the podcast. I will drop those too. And we will be back next episode with how you're going to look at social awareness and money in the church, how what you're doing, what's going on around you in your environment can contribute to what happens when you're looking at possibly being manipulated or not, but how you manage yourself socially in the church. Until next episode, be proactive about your mental health. Be well, and God bless. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Church Hurt Recovery Podcast. I hope you've learned something, and if you did, please remember to subscribe. Also, remember that this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not take the place of therapy. So if you need professional assistance, please seek that out. Until we meet again, be proactive about your mental health, be well, and God bless.